What you're about to experience is one man's quest to see beyond the tumultuous period we're in and to envision what lies just beyond our grasp, yet well within our reach. Welcome to Larry Rifkin's America Trends, where the future has arrived, and it's just in time.
America Trends, back online with you. I'm Larry Rifkin, along with my pal in all efforts, America Trends, John Krofsick. And if you like tough topics to wrap your mind around, here's one for you, John. Parental Alienation Syndrome.
Yeah.
Now, John, you, as a scholar you are, will explain what PAS is. John Krofsick.
I don't think so.
Wow. It's quite a topic. I mean, it really is. And John, I told you I had my own run-in with parental alienation syndrome. Now, thankfully, it was not a personal account or situation. Thankfully, I've been wonderfully married for over 40 years and have two wonderful children. And my wife and I, have never run into these situations. And it's very complicated. This psychological concept that we call PAS, or parental alienation syndrome.
Well, it's a power thing, right?
Yeah, well, it's really, first of all, it's not recognized in all medical circles, but it is gaining a lot of interest, and folks who believe it really should be given status in the psychological guidebooks that they use. But it is, and let me try to describe it as best I can, and then we'll let our guests do it. It's a systematic process by which, in high conflict divorces, one partner tries to destroy the relationship a child has with the other parent.
Yeah, that's awful. That's awful.
Now, I know a lot of people might say, well, doesn't that go on all the time in terms of one parent really trying to despoil these relationships? And it doesn't happen quite in the way that parental alienation does. I mean, this really is an ongoing attempt to totally destroy and sever whatever emotional bond one parent has with a child. Now, where this gets really complicated, John, years ago, when I worked for a PBS affiliate, and we did a documentary called Breaking the Silence. And we busted open to the American public what this was. And yet our findings were shocking, because what we found was that in many cases, it was the abusive partner in a relationship who was trying to alienate a child from the other partner, and often, in many cases, they were getting custody of the children. Now, I know that sounds counterintuitive.
So more men were getting custody of children?
Well, generally men. And, this, again, runs counter to a lot of what we hear.
I always thought the women got the kids.
Well, these were a very select number of divorces. These weren't the typical divorce where, lots of things had gone down, but not the high conflict here and the abuse that we're talking about. This is a sliver of cases, and these are contested divorces. In most cases, people do settle. They go through arbitration or mediation, right, and they do settle. So we're really talking about a sliver of a sliver, but still a really important element to this that we thought was misunderstood. But we had a lot of groups coming at us very quickly just at the onset of social media, and we got behind the story. And the moral of this story is that today, if you get behind a story that's hitting you on social media and you're not ready to catch up,
you're in trouble.
You're in deep trouble. You really are. Well, the story that we are going to share with you today is one that's gotten a lot of attention because the woman who's with us today, Kelly Jones, well, her high conflict divorce was with Alex Jones of InfoWars. And John, you can explain a little bit more about him than I can.
Well, Alex, he started his own network, InfoWars, and actually, early on, I haven't watched it since, but early on, he really did some, really good reporting. And I don't know, then he kind of went off the rails a little bit with the Sandy Hook stuff. That stuff I didn't agree with. I think he hit the mark on some of the other ones, on the Boston bombings and stuff. But, I don't know. I don't know whether it was for ratings or for what it was, but he kind of really got off track, and
Well, how much?
it's
I mean, I know he's been very controversial of late, but how much has this particular story about his relationship with Kelly and his wife and the children, how much attention has that gotten? And has that been something that he's used as content on his program?
not that I've heard. Of course, I haven't listened too much lately, but not to my knowledge, it hasn't been
But
on
it
there.
has gotten a
Yeah.
lot of attention in the
Yes.
press. It
Well,
really has. Well, we were very grateful that Kelly Jones would join us to talk about a syndrome that I don't think a lot of people understand. And we didn't do it because she is of celebrity status with her husband. It's because her story has been quite prominent and she was willing to come by and talk about it. And I don't think you've heard much about parental alienation before, but you will on this podcast on America Trends. On the line with us on America Trends is Kelly Jones. She is an outspoken family court justice activist who won a jury trial to be the primary parent in 2017 around the issue of parental alienation. And obviously her case has gotten a lot of attention because her husband is rather well known, Alex Jones. He's involved in many controversies, this being the most personal and the one that Kelly certainly focuses on. And Kelly, this whole area of parental alienation, people don't understand it. They think, well, of course, in every high conflict divorce, this is going on, that one parent or another or both are trying to put some thoughts in the heads of a child. Explain what this syndrome is.
Well, parental alienation is the process and the result of a concentrated psychological manipulation of the child into having that child show fear, disrespect, or hostility towards the other parent. So it's a specific type of psychological abuse enacted on the child to make them reject the other parent in such an intense way that the child often doesn't want to have anything to do with that other parent any longer and even comes to hate them.
What happened in your case?
Well, it's a very long story, Larry, but basically I was the children's primary parent always. I was the home mom. I was with them the majority of the time. And I filed for divorce. I was hesitant to do so because I knew that my ex-husband would be vindictive. I filed originally collaboratively, trying to soften it, but I had to leave into litigation when I found that my children were being really endangered, and they were showing up from the get-go saying really strange things that I didn't understand what was going on. Starting to say things to me that I'd never experienced before, showing up with disrespect, and over time, this transmogrified into just absolute rejection of me. And my kids had loved me, so I didn't understand what was going on. And I learned about it, unfortunately, within the fire, that my kids had been subjected to severe parental alienation. Eventually showed that in trial and was able to forensically show that, because it's not just, like you said, not just one parent talking badly about the other, which unfortunately most parents will engage in at some point. It's a systematic system of behaviors that one parent will enact on vulnerable, innocent children to really mess with their minds, to get them to reject the parent that they love and adore and need that attachment bond as well.
So here, I mean, you had this very close attachment to your children, and yet systematically your husband began to break all of that down by mental manipulation, bullying. What kind of information was being shared that took them out of a zone where they felt such comfort, warmth, love, and affection for you that they could be moved to believe just the opposite?
Well, a lot of these behaviors, and there's 5 basic behaviors that an alienator will engage in, and I'll list those here for you
Sure.
in a second. But these combine behaviors with a systematic breakdown of my actual access to the children, because one of the central behaviors is limiting contact. So my children began spending less and less time with me, and another complicated aspect of my case, which I also proved in court, was a real serious and concerning bias in my case against me. Always, Alex could do no wrong. When I brought up real concerns, documented concerns about abuse in my in my relationship with Alex, or medical neglect with my kids, I was seen as, making something up, or basically I was gaslit, which many of your listeners will find hard to believe knowing who Alex Jones is. But somehow the system had no problem with him, kept putting the kids more and more with him, even though I was reporting these 5 specific type of behaviors that alienators use, which are, Larry, feeding the children poisonous, horrible messages. My son, for example, was saying that he thought I had evicted his father, talking about the horrible things that basically my children were being told that I had caused everything, that I was trying to take away from him, forever. And he would show up, after missing like one day with them and say, "Oh, I love you forever. My heart will never be apart." Just really histrionic behavior. Again, the second behavior that the alienator will use is limiting contact. Not only was that not providing, normal visitation as afforded already by the agreement or whatever, making it challenging to get first right of refusal, for example, but actually over years of time, really making it impossible when I wasn't with my children to even call them on the phone. And shockingly, and my story will tell, when it comes out in the book that I'm writing, I actually ended up with less time with my kids than drug dealers and prostitutes on trumped-up charges that have been shown to be fictional, and a jury saw that. But during that time, I couldn't even reach them by phone. So I was erased, right? There's a documentary.
How long had you lost custody? I mean, what period of time were they unavailable to you?
Over a period of about, I'm going to say 2 some odd years. I saw them for a very limited amount of time. I went months without contact with them. There were several months where I just would see them 2 hours each a week, 2 hours apiece a week, always with the supervisor, with a clipboard. I mean, just really being put before them also by the system as if I had something terribly wrong with me, which, as my story, as it's coming out, will show, it was really a horror not only on me. Of course, the most horrible thing is what's done to the children, and then having to see your children have this done to them and not being able to help them is a particular kind of agony, for a parent.
And where are the courts in this? And I want to be very honest with people. I was involved in a production many years ago for PBS, and it was called Breaking the Silence, and we did get a lot of pushback on it because it was talking about this parental alienation syndrome. And yet, because it's not in the DSM, the American Psychological Association does not acknowledge this as being one of those things that is verifiable and documentable. I'm just really wondering where the courts stand on this. Are they an aid to you in this process, or are they one of the deterrents to figuring this all out?
I mean, what I say about family court is that corrupt experts in family court create a playground for bullies to beat up on abused ex-spouses and troubled families. In my experience, which was a $6 million experience combined. I mean, this is all just dollar signs to people in my mind's eye. The system completely failed my children and still continues to do so, because contrary to what most people believe or understand, I spent everything I had and all of my energy and every waking hour to get to the place where the jury decided for me to be primary parent. Despite that, Larry, the judge in my case left the children primarily with Alex. And he has now filed again for custody less than a year since the verdict, while the current orders are on appeal with a higher court. It's just a failed system. And unfortunately, often in family court, judges do abuse their discretion. In Travis County, I've been outspoken about it, and it may be shocking to hear, but I really believe there is a true racket where people, the specific experts that are used repeatedly in high-dollar divorce by the same attorneys, are hired and decide with bias according to whoever is giving them the most referrals, and possibly beyond that. Because in my case, I had an expert admit kickback payments to a therapist that she put on my case, and that is racketeering, So it's a troubling situation.
Well, you talk about money. Let me talk about it in the context of power differential. I know this sounds really unusual, and that's why when we did this documentary in 2005, just at the onset of social media campaigns, we fell behind in response to a group that couldn't really get their arms around the fact or wanted to disavow the notion that courts often assign custody to abusive fathers. And so we had fathers' rights groups coming after us. And yet, when you really did look at it, this power differential, the ability to take a mother who was really at wit's end and very emotionally involved and really destroy her case in court simply by this differential was occurring even back then. But because nobody really would acknowledge that parental alienation was this organized set or suite of activities that were being done to disassociate a child with a parent, we really took a beating in the press at that time.
We'll return to this episode of America Trends in just a moment. If you like what we're doing here at America Trends Podcast, please don't keep it to yourself. I know there are a lot of people, John, who think, well, if I'm listening and somebody else wants to listen at the same time, maybe we're going to collide and they're not going to be able to hear us.
Yeah.
Is that the way the technology works?
No, there's plenty of bandwidth. Everybody can listen at the same time.
All right. Well,
make
that
sure you do
dispels
that.
that myth. Now, you can do a number of things that would really be helpful to us. You could give us a kind rating or a review at Apple Podcasts, and that boosts what they consider to be our value and visibility. And what does that do, John?
Well, that puts us in the forefront so that you can find us easier, and most important is other people can find us easier.
And you can subscribe there or on our site, americatrendspodcast.com, or wherever you're listening, so we can alert you to new episodes of the podcast, which, by the way, we put out twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Or you can like us on Facebook or follow us where, John?
On Twitter.
On Twitter. That's
Yeah.
right, where the world turns to hear fake news or whatever it is. Well,
Not
you can
us, though.
direct
We
message
have real
us
news.
at Trends Podcast or using hashtag Trends Podcast. And you know, John, with our growing audience, and really it's been pretty remarkable, a lot of people just came to us the last month or two, and they might have missed earlier episodes. Can they get them again?
They can look through them and pick the ones they want to listen to. They're all on the website, and a lot of them are up on iTunes, many of them.
All right. Well, listen, there's lots of material to listen to. We hope you have the time, and we'll lend it to us because we try to make it worth your while. And thanks so much for listening.
And tell your friends.
We now return to this episode of America Trends.
Well, that's hard to hear, and I know that the Father's Rights Lobby is a very powerful lobby. I will say that I believe that both men and women are targeted by parental alienation, and like you said, it is the power differential. So traditionally, still in America, in my experience, and what I'm familiar with, and I could be wrong, typically the man might have more money or more power in the relationship. And so in family court, that translates to more money to litigate, better attorneys. In my particular case, I ended up losing all but 10% of our business, to which most of our estate had been worked back into. So I was actually financially unable to represent myself on the equal stance as Alex, right? But it is, again, like you said, a suite of behaviors. And one thing I can tell your audience is that all you need to do is look on Twitter or Facebook and search for parental alienation, and you will find group after group after group of people, of tragic, erased parents that this horrible thing has happened to. There's nothing more painful than having the child that you adore and who adored you and who was so connected to you reject you and despise you, and see the anguish that causes them, and also know that how much that maternal attachment bond, or in some cases paternal attachment bond, is needed for that child, and knowing how destructive that is. In my case, again, we proved it forensically. We went in there like trying it like a criminal case, saying these are the behaviors, this is what happened, this is who is involved, here's the evidence, to show that these things were said. And Alex himself admitted that he had engaged in alienating behaviors. So it's definitely provable. It might not be in the DSM, I mean, the DSM unfortunately has taken such a hold on the family court system anyhow. I think we really need to be looking into the behaviors of people anyhow. Like, how are you actually behaving? Because let's face it, Larry, in my case, the evaluator, in my opinion, really soft pedaled on Alex, gave him the benefit of the doubt, ignored, treated my concerns, which I think everybody probably, or a lot of people listening would think would be very valid about Alex, as some sort of hysteria or histrionic behavior, So it's troubling how psychological issues are misused in the courts. I think what really needs to happen is for there to be more transparency for experts, or just for the junk service providers to be kicked out altogether. If something's not rising to the level of a CPS reportable offense, or if CPS has found no fault, then there's no way that people should be without their kids. And I think that's what happens all the time in high-dollar family court. In my case, there was an expert who said she didn't want me to get my kids back because then she wouldn't have a job. And that same expert said that CPS would never have taken my kids away. And yet she, for years, kept my kids from me, requiring a $40,000 a month retainer. This is plain, unfortunately and sadly, it's just, to me, straight up racketeering or keeping kids away from parents for profit.
I haven't really followed this issue in the last 13 years. I was involved in it professionally, not personally. Where has it gone? I mean, what kind of movement is this? And is there a trend? I mean, we look at social and political trends with our podcast. Where do you think this is all headed in terms of the validity and the acknowledged validity within the courts, within the psychological community, this whole issue of parental alienation?
Well, I think that's a great question, Larry. There are powerful factions in the family rights movement. So there's the father's rights movement, and then there's the mother's rights, right? It's divided like a divorce, right? Typically, the father's rights movement is very powerful and has a very powerful lobby. I try not to get too much into the political side of it because I'm not an inherently political person, but the one thing I can respond to is the tragedy of parental alienation being co-opted in many cases by the abuser. So the mother's rights people now ask that people call parental alienation coercive control or domestic abuse by proxy, because a father will come in who is an alienator and use that term against the targeted parent, which actually just happened to me because I took a specific course of action to speak out publicly after the court left my kids with Alex, and after such concerning behaviors as Alex being drunk and yelling about sex acts and in an explicit, in a rant where he was just cursing and saying horrible things in front of my son. I made a choice to speak out publicly. Now my ex-husband, Alex Jones, is using my public speech to say I'm an alienator, which is not what an alienator is. An alienator is someone who engages to the child specifically to persuade them, manipulate them, brainwash them is another term for it, to reject the other parent. And how people can see alienation in the child is that even severely abused kids, like heartbreak kids that have been through hell, physical abuse, you name it, they will not reject a parent. And only the very rarest of circumstances will a child who's even been severely abused reject a parent. If you see a child that is exhibiting total contempt, disrespect, and hatred and rejecting a parent, your inclination is to think, oh, that parent must be terrible. I'm telling, I'd like to reach out to your audience of teachers and coaches and parents and say, if you see that happening, look at the other side of the fence and try to understand how the child might have come to have those feelings.
And what can you do if your child is being alienated? I mean, it had to be so frustrating for you and so many other parents to know that you've done everything you can in the way that you imagine good parenting should be done, and yet all of a sudden this child's drifting away from you. What can you do?
Yeah, and it's even worse than that, Larry. I mean, my kids tell me or have told me that they hate me. My son right now is severely alienated from me and won't even talk to me. I saw him yesterday at school. He said, don't talk to me. I don't want to talk to you. And this is after the judge has left my son with my ex-husband now for over 6 months, and I've had very limited contact with him. So what do you do? I mean, when I presented my argument in court, I said, we need an injunctive period of time, a couple months where there's no contact. It's not forever, but it's just to break the conditioning. Think of parental alienation as a cult programming. You need to get the child out of the environment, let them rejoin and reconnect with the real parent who you are or who the targeted parent is, and then help the other parent, which is always the goal. You know, you always want to have the other parent be a co-parent and be involved if they're able. Educate them on what they're doing, provide them with, guidelines that they cannot do certain behaviors, and if they do, it will limit their contact, right? And then after that time, see if the family can work back together for healing, to be more involved. But it's very hard. I'd say, if somebody listening right now is likely being targeted by parental alienation, I'm so grateful to you, Larry, that you opened the floor on this topic, because I didn't know what was going on in my life when my kids started rejecting me and lying about me and saying they hated me. And it was terrifying. I was overridden with anxiety. And so if someone's listening now and maybe they can understand what's going on in their life, and they can look it up online, because the other way that family court operates, or these experts, is they really isolate you. So by not speaking out and by not connecting with people I have now, I thought I was alone. No, this is a problem that is systemic in our society.
And when you were being rejected by your children because of the manipulation of their thinking toward you, and then the courts started to, again, reassess all of that and reinforce some of that, you had to feel totally isolated at that moment in time.
It was terrible. I can tell you, I cannot tell you how horrible it was, and it continues to be. I've reached out to someone today to say, you need to correct what you did in the past, because now that all this information is coming up about people that are filed against Alex for sexual harassment and assault and discrimination, and that he's being sued by multiple parties for defamation, I mean, it's very clear that who is not being truthful. In the isolation, the one thing the parent can, should, and must do is to document. If I had not documented my case like I did, and you're going to have to self-drive that, the lawyers aren't going to tell you to do it. Actually, I have a website, Larry, custodywars.com, and a component of that I'm going to add on shortly is how to deal with parental alienation, but how to document. I'm even going to give people my file structure. I'm going to give people specific kind of issue-based tracking models that they can use to say, okay, I'm going to keep this log of, poisonous messages that my children are reiterating back to me, with adult language. I'm going to keep track of that. And unfortunately, in my case currently, I am enjoined, which means I'm forbidden from recording. But if I could be also documenting by recording. The problem with that, Larry, of course, is that makes you seem paranoid. And like you said, the court is reinforcing that previously in my case, or all of this alienation was coming at me. If you're on the defensive, coming back going, this is going on, look at this, it's a very weakened stance to come from. So you can shore that up by never being reactive. Do whatever it takes as a parent to have a support system with you if you can. If you're leaving abuse, maybe reach out to a church or a domestic violence group to see if somebody can be witness to you when you're with your kids. Because in my case, my kids have lied about me, and a lot of that has been disproven, but without a witness or recordings, that would not have happened. So you really have to be present, and there's tons of wonderful groups out on the internet. And in fact, there's a wonderful documentary about to come out called Erasing Families. And I think the information is out there, but just keep your calm, go meditate, seek therapy, whatever it takes, to keep your cool in that situation, because the goal is to freak you out through your child. The other parent is trying to harm you through your own child, which it does. And if you've been abused, that will, obviously solicit an anxiety response. So the cooler you can keep your head, maybe by just staying present and reaching out to other groups, even if you have to do so confidentially, which you might need to do to protect your case, just understand that you're not in it alone and there's ways to manage
Kelly,
that
give us
distress.
that website again that you're developing, because I think a lot of people who are going to be listening to this may say, I never understood exactly what was going on, but now you've given a name to it in terms of your name, you've given a definition, and you've given us some tools that we can use to deal with this, as difficult as it is. Give us that website again.
Yes, it's custodywars.com. And also on Facebook, I have an entity called Custody Hero, and that's really my support for people that are in the MAW, that are going through parental alienation or just family court. And there are thousands and thousands of people, more so on Facebook than on Twitter, that really join together to support each other in these issues.
How prevalent is this situation, condition? What would you say? I mean, when people listen to this, some may have no knowledge of this whatsoever. What would you say? Is this rare? Is this just in very high conflict divorces? Explain, what you think the severity of this is in our culture, and is our culture any different than others?
Well, I will tell you that both Mexico, I think it was, and Brazil passed legislation against parental alienation. So it's not just a national problem, it's an international problem. Unfortunately, I guess there's certain type of personality disorders that lend themselves towards this type of coercive control or domestic abuse by proxy. I think it's very prevalent. I've met thousands of people that have had it happen to them. And let me tell you one other thing, is I know that the experts, not only in my case but in others, are fully aware of what's going on with this happen. So what needs to happen is there needs to be more oversight of the people that get in between couples in higher dollar divorce, and more regulation and more transparency.
Kelly Jones, thank you so much for being with us today on America Trends. I think this is going to help a lot of people, and we thank you so much for sharing your story. And there's always got to be pathfinders to lead to new outcomes in whatever condition and social institutions that we have in our society. And I think, unfortunately, you're one of those.
Well, that's very kind. If I can help somebody navigate what I've been through, I appreciate it.